quite a lot's happened since I first talked about cloud computing at this conference in 2009, having started research in 2008. And I suppose the big thing that, although you wouldn't think of it looking at this room right now, that has had an impact recently is the pandemic. So this is interesting. This is a statement from the International Telecommunications Union just 3 months after the first lockdown was announced in most countries in March 2020, how cloud computing has supported the COVID-19 response. And that's not so much to do with the health response, that's more to do with how do you move billions of people in a matter of weeks or sometimes just days' notice to working from home, studying from home, shopping from home, socializing from home, and all that stuff. And that's had a big impact on the industry. So the cloud sector has seen bumper growth in the last 2 years. I mean, in fact, in the first 6 months, one cloud company said to me, we've already had several years growth just 6 months into this pandemic, and some are saying 2 years into it, it's probably 10 years acceleration in the uptake of cloud by businesses and by governments. And if you look at industry surveys, this is the most recent Flexera State of the Cloud Report 2022, and they show that 2/3 of respondents, and it's quite a big sample actually, over 750 companies were interviewed for this, over 2/3 said that their usage of cloud was somewhat higher or significantly higher than they had planned. And this is in the second year of the pandemic. I also want to just mention, before I get into contracts and privacy policies and stuff, the big picture. And we've heard a reference to this in the previous panel, but the big tech companies, they are big and they are getting bigger, and that has benefits, as we heard. It also presents challenges for lawmakers and regulators. But if you look at this, this goes from the end of 2017 to the end of 2021. Amazon, clear market leader in terms of market share by value, with about 1/3 of the global market. Microsoft growing strongly into a pretty strong second position. Google also growing strongly, as you can see from, I mean, these numbers are not exact, from maybe 7% and 9%. As a percentage growth, that's a lot. And a lot of it is likely to continue for reasons I'll get to in a minute. Alibaba Cloud is one to watch, major Chinese cloud provider. They are huge in China. They are trying to grow fast everywhere else, and I'll talk about the implications of that with some examples from their contracts. IBM, sadly, which 50 years ago was the world leader probably in computing, continues its inexorable decline, at least in the cloud sector. But what I want to do now is to put that into perspective in a slightly different format in the chart. In terms of market share, you can see Amazon with 33%, Microsoft 22%, Google 10%. But note the next 10 biggest are only 21%, and all the rest, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in the cloud space, they're only 14% between them. One other thing I want to do in terms of setting the context for the marketplace is to point out that multi-cloud is now pretty much standard practice. And what I mean by that is that organizations, whether they are small businesses, large businesses, government agencies, whatever, tend to use more than one cloud provider. And for the first time, actually, in this 2022 report, the number of people saying they used Azure, so this is not about market share by value, this is about how many people use Microsoft's cloud services, just edged fractionally ahead, 1% ahead of AWS. Those two are extremely competitive, I can tell you. But if you add all those numbers up, you obviously get to a lot more than 100%. So interestingly, Google there, which looked like it was well down the chart on market share by value, has got nearly half the people now saying they are using Google Cloud. And that is a dramatic increase from 2 years previously. So what's in a typical cloud contract, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about? Well, first of all, usually you'll find a lot of words. And I could have picked any of them, to be honest, but I picked Facebook. And there is at least one person here from Facebook, I think. Not everybody from Facebook's arrived. But how many words do you think Facebook has in its terms of service documents? If you're looking at the slides, that's a cheat. Let me just tell you, it's about 33,000 words. Now, as the Economist podcasts tend to say, well, is that a big number? And I think the best way to determine whether it's a big number is to compare it to something else. So let's look at Shakespeare's tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, which is a mere 30,500 words. So I would say that is a big number. And because we had to look at 40 cloud services, we're probably edging up towards the 1 million words mark. And you ask people, do you read these things? Well, of course they don't. And indeed, we wouldn't do it if it wasn't our jobs. Right, now then, so to save you time, we reviewed the contracts for 40 cloud services from 32 cloud providers. It's a global sample of providers, but we were interested in providers that offered services to customers in Europe. And I say Europe, not the EU, for obvious reasons, because we include the UK. Right, now the contracts that we looked at, which we call terms of service or cloud contracts, are a bundle of documents. And they have different names, confusingly, lots of different names actually. I won't give you all the permutations, but they might be called TOS, or Terms of Service, Service Agreement, Privacy Policy, Acceptable Use Policy, Data Processing Addendum, or Data Processing Agreement, confusingly, Service Level Agreement, Law Enforcement Guidelines. I'll come back to that in a minute as to why they could all be important for privacy and data protection purposes. We excluded some providers we really wanted to look at because not all of their terms of service were available via their websites unless you signed up and disclosed a whole lot of information and gave the impression you were about to buy stuff, and then they would come and talk to you and show you the contracts. Now, we don't think that's a great way to do business, and I'm sorry, that means we didn't cover Rackspace, Deutsche Telekom, or Telefonica, who we had hoped to cover. We then did a comparative analysis, and we've been developing our methodology over the last dozen years. So our first survey was published in 2010, and we keep expanding it each time we repeat it. We now look at 23 variables. 13 are general contract clauses, like the choice of law and the forum and the termination provisions and the exclusions of liability, et cetera, But 10 of them relate specifically to data protection and privacy. And we've reported our findings of the most recent survey in 2 research papers. I'm glad to say a lot less than 1 million words, but still quite a big read. They're available freely on SSRN. Sorry, that's small print. But the first one, which covers all the general contract stuff, is called Contracts for Clouds Revisited. And the second one is Privacy in the Clouds Revisited. And you can download those from ssrn.com without charge.